The more I study, the more insatiable I feel my genius for it to be. Understand well as I may, my comprehension can only be an infinitesimal fraction of all I want to understand. That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show. If you can't give me poetry, can't you give me poetical science? The analytical engine has no pretensions whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. The intellectual, the moral, and the religious seem to me all naturally bound up and interlinked together in one great and harmonious whole. I am never really satisfied that I understand anything, because, understand it well as I may, my comprehension can only be an infinitesimal fraction of all I want to understand about the many connections and relations which occur to me, how the matter in question was first thought of or arrived at, etc., etc. One essential object is to choose that arrangement which shall tend to reduce to a minimum the time necessary for completing the calculation. The analytical engine might act upon other things besides numbers, were objects found whose mutual fundamental relations could be expressed by those of the abstract science of operations, and which should also be susceptible to adaptations to the action of the operating notation and mechanism of the engine. Supposing, for instance, that the fundamental relations of pitched sounds in the science of harmony and of musical composition were susceptible of such expression and adaptations, the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. Forget this world and all its ills, and, if possible, its countless charlatans, everything except the enchantress of numbers. A new, vast, and powerful language is developed for the future use of analysis, in which to wield its truths so that they may become of more speedy and accurate practical application for the purposes of mankind than the means hitherto in our possession have rendered possible. Thus, not only the mental and the material, but the theoretical and the practical in the mathematical world, are brought into more intimate and effective connection with each other. Imagination is the discovering faculty, preeminently. It is that which feels and discovers what is, the real, which we do not see and does not exist for our senses. Mathematical science shows what is. It is the language of unseen relations between things. Imagination too shows what is. Hence, she is or should be especially cultivated by the truly scientific, those who wish to enter into the worlds around us. The analytical engine has no pretensions whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power to anticipate any analytical relations or truths. Its province is to assist us in making available what we are already acquainted with. But the science of operations, as derived from mathematics more especially, is a science of itself, and has its own abstract truth and value, just as logic has its own peculiar truth and value, independently of the subjects to which we may apply its reasonings and processes. In considering any new subject, there is frequently a tendency, first, to overrate what we find to be already interesting or remarkable, and, secondly, by a sort of natural reaction, to undervalue the true state of the case, when we do discover that our notions have surpassed those that were really tenable. It may be desirable to explain that by the word operation, we mean any process which alters the mutual relation of two or more things, be this relation of what kind it may be. This is the most general definition, and would include all subjects in the universe. The analytical engine is an embodying of the science of operations, constructed with peculiar reference to abstract numbers as the subject of those operations. Many people who are not conversant with mathematical studies imagine that because the business of Babbage's analytical engine is to give its results in numerical notation, the nature of its processes must consequently be arithmetical and numerical, rather than algebraical and analytical. This is an error. The engine can arrange and combine its numerical quantities exactly as if they were letters or any other general symbols, and in fact, it might bring out its results in algebraical notation, were provisions made accordingly. The object of the engine is in fact to give the utmost practical efficiency to the resources of numerical interpretations of the higher science of analysis while it uses the processes and combinations of this latter. The analytical engine, on the contrary, can either add, subtract, multiply, or divide with equal facility, and performs each of these four operations in a direct manner, without the aid of any of the other three. In an enabling mechanism to combine together general symbols in successions of unlimited variety and extent, a uniting link is established between the operations of matter and the abstract mental processes of the most abstract branch of mathematical science. For almost every computation, a great variety of arrangements for the succession of the processes is possible, and various considerations must influence the selections amongst them for the purposes of a calculating engine. One essential object is to choose that arrangement which shall tend to reduce to a minimum the time necessary for completing the calculation. We might even invent laws for series or formula in an arbitrary manner, and set the engine to work upon them, and thus deduce numerical results which we might not otherwise have thought of obtaining, but this would hardly, perhaps, in any instance, be productive of any great practical utility, or calculated to rank higher than as a philosophical amusement. Secondly, figures, the symbols of numerical magnitude, are frequently also the symbols of operations, as when they are the indices of powers. Wherever terms have a shifting meaning, independent sets of considerations are liable to become complicated together, and reasoning and results are frequently falsified.